Welcome to my 183rd video on my work with OO gauge. In this part I'll be dealing with a bunch of small accessories for my Hornby Dublo 3-rail tabletop. Figures, road vehicles, station fittings, signals, water cranes, loading gauges, advertising signs and other odds and ends. I've been accumulating some of these items for quite a while, and with track work largely complete, I finally got around to fixing them up where needed and placing them. I bought these items as a single lot on eBay UK, basically right at the start of my Hornby Dublo 3-rail project. Some of the items included were without much value, such as these unpainted and often broken Airfix figures. I had a couple of sets of these already that I never got round to painting, so I certainly didn't need more. And the plastic luggage trolleys and vending machines weren't of much interest either. But these items were much more interesting: old Wardy master model metal kiosk and coal staves, and a wooden AA box, and a Wardy fire bucket and sand station, a couple of metal benches, a metal cycle rack with a couple of bicycles, and a couple of metal weighing vending machines. The set also included quite a number of painted figures, mostly metal. So all in all, I thought it was good value. The actual price was only £18, but for me in Canada the postage and import duties were higher than that. Still, I got everything delivered to myself for just over $70 Canadian, which wasn't too bad given the nice old Diecast items included. Something else that I had wanted to get for a while was some of these old Diecast advertising hoardings, which seemed to go so well with the old-style Dublo layouts. These can get quite expensive. I finally ended up buying a lot of 6 for nearly $90 Canadian with the shipping, so they cost me $15 each. But you can pay more than that for these old signs. Generally, the 6 that I bought still had their original posters on them, but one side of one of them was blank, so I tried to print something to go on that, as seen here. The yellow toner in my printer seems to have given out, so I'm not getting a very full range of colours. I decided that this was probably the best bet out of my printing attempts, so I cut it out and stuck it onto the hoarding with rocket glue. Here you can see all 6 signs, well, one side of them anyway. They do all have posters on the other side as well. The Wardy Diecast set of coal staves wasn't in great shape. The decal on the back had flaked away and all of the coal was gone. I printed a new sign for the back. It came out mostly blue rather than green because of my printer problems, but I didn't think that mattered very much. I cut out the new sign that I'd printed and stuck it in place with rocket glue. Then I got out materials to put some coal into the staves: a bag of real coal, a jar of diluted white glue, a sprayer of alcohol, and a pipette. I propped the staves up at an angle, filled them with real coal, and then sprayed the coal with alcohol so that the glue would soak in. Then I applied a generous amount of the diluted white glue using the pipette, and left everything to dry. I may have overdone it a bit with the glue, but generally too much is better than too little, as the coal will keep flaking out if there's not enough glue. Here are the staves with the glue part-way dried. This metal bench was missing much of its paint and didn't really have any way to stand up. I cut a piece of thick card to make a base for it. I decided it might work better if I fitted separate base pieces to the 2 legs of the bench. I drilled holes in the card and fitted the legs of the bench into the holes. I found that I needed to angle the base pieces a bit to stop the bench falling over. Then I painted the bench with some wood colour paint. I ended up with 2 of these Wardy fire stations. One came in a lot of accessories from eBay UK, and then I bought another at the Breslau train show. I don't really quite understand what whoever designed these was thinking of. The buckets do look basically the correct size for 00 scale, but they're mounted something like 12 feet off the ground in 00 scale. See the Diecast 00 scale figure here for comparison. Even if the guy climbed onto the sand bin, he'd still be reaching right over his head to get at the buckets. Not a very promising start to fighting a fire. I felt that I'd just get irritated every time I looked at these stations if I left them as they were, so I separated the buckets from the sand bins. I touched up the paint on the buckets a bit. This die-cast weighing machine had lost quite a bit of its paint. I did what I could to touch it up using some Flockwill antique white, which I also bought at the Breslau show. I bought these additional die-cast figures from British model trains close to me here in Ontario, Canada. The figures in the eBay set were mostly passengers or workmen, so I really wanted some more station staff, so I was happy to find the set of die-cast figures seen at top here. The 4 figures at the bottom are more modern items from Masterpiece, and I didn't end up using those with my Dublo setup. They may end up as Loco Crew. After the paint on the fire buckets dried, I used a black marker to vaguely indicate the lettering, as on the other buckets. This is what I ended up with, separate sand bins and bucket racks, but at least now 00 scale people should be able to reach the items for use. You can also see the touched up weighing machine here, not perfect, but better than it was. There were 5 seated figures in the set from eBay, 3 were metal and 2 plastic. The set also provided 3 benches, the one that I fixed up and painted, and a small green metal bench, and a long 2-sided plastic bench. One of the metal figures was sitting on her suitcase, so she didn't need a bench. I glued the other seated figures onto the available benches using 3-in-1 glue. Here's something of an overview of what I had at this point. I'd bought a Pico set of plastic cases and trunks from British model trains to provide some luggage to go on trolleys, etc. I also bought that bus from British model trains, and I put some of the luggage into the rack on its roof. I used a strip of styrene sheet to join up the sand bin and bucket rack of one of the sets. This provided me with a joint set which I placed on the platform of the large station on the tabletop. I bought these 2 trackside Days Gone vehicles on eBay UK. They were quite interesting vehicles, a Scammell 6-wheeler truck and a Sentinel steam lorry. They came with limited edition certificates, a bit pointless so far as I can see, and 11,000 is hardly very limited. How many do they usually make? If you've watched my previous videos, you may remember this old-style file folder full of Dublo bits which I acquired quite a while ago. This purchase provided my initial stock of Dublo buffer stops, though I ended up needing more as I complicated my track pan with additional sidings. The set also included 3 loading gauges, including the very nice metal Dublo one with the arm actually suspended by little chains. There were quite a number of signals, including 3 Dublo electrically operated ones. There were also bits for several water cranes and some extra signal bits. I didn't really intend to install the Dublo electrically operated signals on my tabletop setup for actual electrical operation, but I was curious as to how they were supposed to work and if they would still operate electrically. I retrieved a scan of the instructions for these signals from Charles Cooper's railway pages. If you pause here, you can read those instructions. I must admit I had to read them a couple of times before I got the hang of what they were saying. Basically, it boils down to this. A signal set with 2 arms will have 3 electrical connections on the front of the base and 2 on the back, as indicated here. The central connection on the front is the common connection, and that is left connected to the power source, around 12 volts DC, at all times. The other connections will be powered from the opposite side of the power source on a passing contact basis to operate the arms. Power to the left front contact will raise one of the arms, the upper home arm in this example. Power to the right front contact will lower that arm. Power to the left back contact will raise the other arm, and power to the right back contact will lower that arm. Power is only supposed to be applied for a brief period on a passing contact basis. This example is for one post with 2 arms, a home and a distant, but the same operating principle applies to signals with 2 upper posts with 1 arm each. The front side contacts will operate one arm and the back contacts the other. The contacts are based on wires being inserted into holes on the side of the base and then held in place by screws on the top. One of the signals that I received was missing its screws, the one in the middle here. I was able to replace the screws with some from a set that I bought on Amazon to help with repairs, etc. I used M2x6 screws. The original screws wouldn't have been metric, of course, but these were close enough to work. There's a train going by outside now. I used my bench controller to test the signals. With a bit of oiling and persuasion, I was able to get them to work. I used pieces of piano wire in crocodile clips. I screwed one piece of piano wire into the center common contact and then touched the other contacts with the other piano wire piece to operate the arms. So now I'll show you a little video of that. So they do sort of vaguely work if you're lucky. Famous last words. There we go, see? This middle setting, this middle connection at the front takes one side of the power, and then the switches on either side here, whoops, operate the lower, the distant signal. And the switches at the back operate the home signal. And with a bit of oiling and things, they will work. Sometimes they still get stuck. Yeah. The distant especially does not work very well. See, sometimes it works, you know. So there we go. I'm not intending to really use them like that, but let's try not to short circuit the controller. I don't know. I'm just wondering if you can see better. You might see better without the other light on. Getting a bit of sparking there. Well, I'm putting like about 14 volts or something into this probably. But there you go. See, it does work basically. Hornby Dublo electrically operated signals, but I'm not really planning to try and hook them up for electrical operation on my layout. I placed the various items onto the tabletop. Here's one end of the large station platform with the fire station, the weighing machine, a bench with a lady on it, a child, a luggage trolley, and a couple of station staff figures. Behind that I parked the Scammell six-wheeler with a workman figure. At the other end of that platform I put the long bench with a couple of figures and a couple more station staff. I put the buckets from the other fire station on one end of the island platform building, and the sand bin went on the other end of that building, with the small green bench next to the fire buckets there, and then an advertising sign and a couple of porters with trolleys. I put the kiosk at the far end of the island platform with more staff figures and the lady sitting on a suitcase, and you can just sort of see the sand bin peeping round the edge of the building there. Here's a bit more of a close-up of the kiosk and the figures. I parked the bus at the back of the island platform. I put the bicycle rack at the end of the platform near the footbridge. I put the steam lorry by the level crossing. I also put one of the signals there. I have to admit that I made no attempt to really signal this layout properly. I do like to try to do that, and I've come pretty close on my other layouts, but honestly it seemed to me that full signalling for this track plan with all of its points would get insanely complicated. I put a little figure on the goods depot working on the crane. I put the coal staves with a couple of figures over behind the line coming from the engine shed. The staves came out basically okay once the glue dried. Here's a wider view of that area with advertising signs at the back, water cranes, signals, and a loading gauge. I particularly like that old Dublo loading gauge with a suspended arm. I'm not so sure about the water cranes. I did replace the red Hornby water hoses on the cranes with pieces of heat shrink. Here's another advertising sign and another signal in the back right corner. I spread most of the advertising signs along the back of the table. As I say, I just put signals here and there in vaguely logical positions, but without trying to be complete about it. I put the wooden AA box by the level crossing. I did check, and this type of AA box was first introduced in 1927, so it would be appropriate for a pre-war period, although obviously the number of boxes around the country increased considerably over time. This was the best I could manage for a close-up of the AA box in place. Here's the left-hand end of the table with the ends of the platforms, the tunnel, and some signals. And here's a general view of the centre of the table with all of this miscellaneous clutter in place.